can you please turn your camera off during the session? So what's this evening's theme? What's it all about? Well, we're actually delighted to have back a friend of the charity, a very good friend, Louis, who I'm certain a lot of you will know already. Seen him at events, was one of our managers here, and still is one of our trainers, and I'm certain Louis will tell you a little bit more about that later on. What we asked Louis to do was to share some of his views and experience on what it's like to be a coach that's working with disabled people, and how you can make your sessions more accessible using various simple little techniques and sort of tips, really. So what Louis done is he's actually prepared a half-an-hour pre-recorded video, which we're all going to watch together in a minute, but he's also then agreed to stay on and have a live question and answer session, about 15 minutes. So if you can think of any questions you'd like to put to Louis about sports coaching, working with disabled people in a coaching environment, I'm certain he'll do his best to answer them. So if you're ready, as I say, it's a 30-minute pre-recorded video. If you just want to put yourselves on mute for the moment, and then when we get to the Q&A, we can start talking to you directly. Okay, so sit back and enjoy.
Hi everyone, I'm Louis and welcome to the Adapted Sports Workshop, hosted by Disability Sports Coach as part of their virtual summer festival. For all those that have attended some activities already, I hope you really enjoyed them. For those that are new today, I hope you enjoy this. Just some instructions before we get going. Disability Sports Coach are an award-winning provider of sport and physical activity for disabled people. They've delivered sessions to over 60,000 disabled people and trained over 7,000 aspiring coaches. This will be a 30-minute workshop, and then there'll be an opportunity to ask questions at the very end for 15 minutes or so. I've also detailed Disability Sports Coach's social media handles, so their Twitter, Facebook and Instagram, should you want to post as this workshop progresses. A bit about me. I have up to 10 years experience in the disability sector, working as a coach, development officer and manager, and a coach educator. I'm currently employed as a sport and physical activity development manager with Sense. Sense are a national charity that support people that are deafblind and have complex disabilities. I'm also the founder and manager of Southwark Stars Disability Football Club. It's a local club for any adults with a learning disability. So this workshop aims to improve your understanding of a popular sports coaching tool called the STEPS model. Some of you may be familiar with the STEPS model, as it crops up quite often in level 1 qualifications or other entry-level qualifications. Hopefully I'll be able to talk around the STEPS model and really relate it to working with disabled people and the different impairments and needs that disabled people have. As it says there, this is an entry-level workshop to deliver in sport for disabled people. This will hopefully just improve your confidence and give you some useful tips for when you're planning, delivering and reviewing your sessions. So the STEPS model. The STEPS model is a simple, easy to use tool that coaches can use before, during and after sessions. I've already highlighted that twice. So again, a really important thing, be considering this model before you attend a session, whilst you're planning, during it and after when you're reviewing. The STEPS model helps you to create inclusive sessions and activities. It enables people of different abilities and impairments to take part and change your own coaching style. It's a really good way of evaluating the way that you work and how you can improve. So the STEPS model is an acronym and each letter stands for a different element. The S is for space, T is for task, E is for equipment, P is for people, and S is for speed. Now these, you can use these elements interchangeably. They don't exist in silo. So we may be considering space and equipment, space and task, the people and equipment, and the people and speed at the same time. So we'll run through each of these 5 elements to give you a bit more information about them and hopefully some useful tips. So firstly, space. Change the size of the space or how the space is used. For each of these elements, I'm going to give an introductory sentence and then some bullet points to further explain what I mean. So here, the change the size of the space or how the space is used. we may ensure the space is appropriate for your age group or ability level. Now, most children or beginner levels, the general rule is that you use a slightly smaller space for younger people or beginner level, so they can get used to a smaller space, get used to the task they're doing without having to travel too far. Generally, adults or people at an advanced level use a bigger space, and that kind of generally applies to most sports when played competitively.
Hugh, the sound seems to have gone. Is it possible to stop it and rewind? So I don't know. It's obviously still playing for you, but it hasn't been playing for about 30 seconds or so now.
Okay, so let me just go back a little bit, okay? I'll try again.
Yeah, no worries at all.
Okay, do you want to try that out again?
They use a smaller size pitch, so they can allow for more success as they're travelling around, more enjoyment, less distance to travel.
It seems to have gone again, the sound.
Sometimes for people that are an advanced level, you can progress the activity by making the space much smaller.
Sorry, folks, we seem to be having a few technical problems here. Let me just move it forward just a touch and see if that makes a difference.
Sorry, Hugh.
Sound goes off when you mute yourself.
It's when I mute myself, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think if you go back to the space slide, that's when it kind of dropped off, Hugh.
Okay. Shall I try from there?
Less distance to travel. So, moving on to the next point. Although space is good for having a bigger space for age groups, for smaller age groups or ability levels, for lesser ability levels, it's also really good to consider the space when you want to progress or regress an activity. Sometimes for people that are an advanced level, you can progress the activity by making the space much smaller and much more difficult to maneuver. If people are really struggling with tight spaces, make the space bigger so it allows them to kind of pick up the task, pick up the activity, and pick up the skill much easier. So those 2 points are quite slightly contradictory, but it's about knowing the group that you're working with and how you adapt based on their ability level. So I'm going to show you a quick video about how you can progress for a group that's more advanced. This is a really good video that highlights maybe making a space smaller can actually further challenge people. So this is Barcelona's football team warming up for a match at Wembley. This is an activity called the Rondo, where they take part in keeping the ball within a circle, passing the ball between each other. There's two people in the middle chasing it down. Now, as you've just seen already, this is a really advanced elite group of players, and making the space as small as possible makes it more difficult. They've also used lots of players in that space. That makes it another challenge. If you were to use this activity for people with a lesser ability, certainly make the space much bigger and have less people doing the activity at once. They make it look incredibly easy, but it's a really difficult task, and the size of that space is so small. Hopefully that's explained it slightly more. Okay, and lastly, I would also suggest using zones to match people of similar abilities together. When you're working with similar abilities, people can find it easier to work alongside somebody that is the same level as them. So a really good example of this is inclusive zone basketball. Inclusive zone basketball is an adapted version of basketball, and it allows people that are disabled and non-disabled to take part at the same time. Now, clues in the title, inclusive zone basketball, the court is laid out into different zones, and that's catered for different people's ability needs and impairment types. Here, you can see down the middle, there's 4 people that are wheelchair users, and their zone is all the way through the middle from top to bottom of the court. Then on either side, you have non-wheelchair users using the space and the zones allocated on the channels. So here and here, again, going up and down. This just allows for players of similar abilities and needs to take part in an activity, in a team game, and do so effectively. So that's the first point. Second point is task. So task. Modify the task through changes to the activity to ensure people of different ability levels can take part. Firstly, you may want to consider the rules, making the aim of the activity easier or harder. Now, a great example of this is beginner tennis players who use 2 bounces rather than just 1. You may find you have a session or a game, a match, where there's somebody that is advanced level and somebody that is at beginner level. The advanced player can play with the normal rules and have 1 bounce. The beginner could have 2 bounces. That way they can both take part in the activity together and both getting some enjoyment and success from it. Another thing you could do is change the difficulty level. So review the difficulty level and what is needed and what needs to be changed to make it easier or harder for the group that you're working with. You could also introduce a scoring system. So that may favour players that are beginners. For example, advanced players in a game of basketball need to make 5 passes before they can shoot. Or similarly, a group of beginners can actually achieve a goal or a point should they make 1 successful pass rather than having to get it into the hoop. So introduce different rules, difficulty levels, and scoring systems. Now, to really relay that and relate that to an adapted sport, I'm going to show you 2 images of New Age curling. Now, New Age curling is an adapted sport, a version of curling on ice. Here we have 2 matches taking place. The one on the right is an older man, looks in slightly more competitive environment. On the left is some schoolgirls that look like they're in a school PE lesson and perhaps kind of beginner levels. So the differences here, I'll talk you through it. On the right, the target is much further away in contrast to the left. But not only is it further away, the style of target is different. The target on the right uses colour, and he's playing the traditional version of the sport. Now, the traditional version of the sport is that only stones that are placed on the rings and in the middle, closest to the centre, are counted. Whereas the mat on the left, the target on the left, sorry, there you can see numbers going from the edge to the middle, and that shows that they've adapted the scoring system and allowed for any stone on that target to be able to achieve points and to earn points. That way, the beginners enjoy it slightly more, get a better success rate, and therefore want to do it again. The chap on the right It's clear he's taking it more seriously and wants to play a competitive level against peers. This is just a great example, actually, of how we've not only modified the task that we're talking about now with the rules, the difficulty level, and the scoring system, but also you're looking at how the space is adapted, something that we've already spoken about. Moving on, so one last point on the task, or a couple of points. Be sure to absolutely ensure there's the appropriate duration of intensity for the task. Now, this will depend on the group that you're working with, their impairment types, and their needs. Should you be working with somebody that has a learning disability, really ensure that the task is perhaps shorter but repeated often. Now, when I say the correct intensity for a task, I really mean the effort that you put in, physical effort, as well as your learning capacity, your mental effort, and the amount of concentration that you must give. So somebody with a learning disability may be able to complete the task to the physical level, but they may find it really difficult concentrating for that period of time. So, as I said, shorter activities, but repeated so they can remember. That's also the same for the physical exertion. Really don't overdo people. You might find they're flagging after 10, 15 minutes. That's when you need to review the duration. Lastly, we've spoken about all the different adaptations that you can make to the group if they're all together. It may be more appropriate to have separate activities. They can't always be modified. A great example of this is using tennis. All players could perform the serve. Advanced participants could perform an overhead serve, while next to them, the beginners could perform an underarm serve. That means both groups of players are completing the same task, but adapted to their ability level. Okay, that's task. Moving on to the third point now, equipment. So we've done S, T, and now we're on E. So, equipment. Change or modify the type of equipment being used for all or some of the people in the group. Use a variety of sizes, weights, textures, shapes, and colours. So, for the first bullet point, people with autism, let's say, who have a heightened need to stimulate senses, often prefer tactile or multicoloured balls. And this could really help their engagement in the session and their concentration. Change the size and weight for people with less strength, for example. And a really good example of that is often in athletics, and particularly with javelin. So I'm going to show you a few just kind of examples of javelins that are used for different people, and then change size, weight, even texture and shape and colour. So tick all of those first points. Javelin is also the best sport to find people with funny faces when they're completing the activity. So I couldn't help but include some of those in here. This is obviously an athlete who's taken part at London 2012. She's clearly a professional and elite athlete using the full size javelin and the full weight. For somebody at a junior level, the javelin becomes much harder to throw, so they've adapted it and have used a smaller, lighter javelin. That could then continue to reduce depending on the age group or ability levels. And here we see a foam javelin with a child, maybe a primary school or early secondary school years, that is foam, so much easier to throw. It's slightly bigger, so they can grip hold of it easier. Both of those points will increase success and make it much more enjoyable for the person taking part. Lastly, you can see going down even maybe to primary school ages, where javelin is being introduced to this young chap, and it looks like either a paper or straw being used to replace the javelin. So again, these are just really obvious examples of how equipment has been changed. But please think how you might want to change all of the equipment that you use during your sessions, so it's more appropriate for the people in your group. So consider using specialist equipment too. Obviously, when thinking about working with disabled people, sometimes specialist equipment is needed. So sports that are often played, let's say for blind people or for people that use blindfolds when they're playing. I'll show you an example of this actually, moving on. So this is goalball. Here's a great example of the different tailored piece of equipment. It's a goal ball used in the sport goal ball, where players are either blind or visually impaired and all wear face masks. You'll notice the bells just inside the ball, they rattle when the ball is moving. So because everyone is blindfolded when playing the sport, it allows participants to hear the ball instead of having to look for it. Other sports, such as blind tennis or blind football, also use audible balls, which is what this is called. This equipment is also really brightly coloured, so should you be using it in a different circumstance with perhaps visually impaired people, it's a really nice contrast colour, really bright, it will contrast with the flooring, so people with visual impairment will be able to see it really easily. Lastly, you can see it's got holes in it. That could allow for people with a lesser grip or lesser gripability to be able to hold on to the ball. Again, it could be a nice piece of equipment for people with autism because it's quite textured and has those holes, so really could stimulate their need. That's just a really good example of a great bit of adapted equipment. I also mentioned the assistive ramps on assistive equipment. So it's specialist or assistive equipment. Here's a boccia ramp, the piece of yellow equipment that the support worker or coach is holding. Now, for those that don't know, boccia is a target throwing game and requires players to propel balls towards a target. If players are unable to propel a ball far away with their arms or kicking it, they can use an assistive ramp like this. The ramp is held by the coach or by a peer, another player, and the person taking part. So in this example, this chap using a wheelchair who probably hasn't got enough mobility in his arms to be able to propel a ball, can tell the coach or the support person the direction in which it needs to face and then push or prod the ball down the ramp. This is a really simple kind of adaptation that allows all players to take part. Now, a boccia ramp is quite expensive, so you may want to consider how you want to use that in other circumstances, not just in boccia. I regularly use it when playing, when coaching football or basketball, games that you need to propel, throw or kick a ball towards other people. Now, if someone should kick or throw the ball towards this chap, I could easily pick up the ball, put it onto the ramp. He could tell me who he wants to pass to and then push or prod the ball down the ramp. That way that person's really engaged and it's not tokenistic. You're not just there picking up the ball and throwing it on. They're actually heavily involved in the game and taking part as much as the others are. Okay, so lastly on equipment, also consider equipment that differs in speed. Like the javelin example, all of those different types of javelin will differ in speed. The heavier ones will fly quicker, the lighter ones are maybe easier to throw, but will certainly travel slightly slower. This is really important when playing ball games or racket sports, essentially when people need to react to the speed of a ball or something coming towards them. A good example of that is in volleyball, and perhaps using a balloon instead of a volleyball that will allow players with less mobility more time to react and make contact with the ball. That would just mean that they're getting more success, enjoying the activity slightly more, and you could tweak it depending on the group that you have. Okay, so that's equipment. So we've gone through 3 of the 5 at the moment. The next one is people. We've discussed people an incredible amount of time already. So when I mentioned at the start that they're intertwined, people certainly are. You always need to be thinking of people. So people, understand your group and individual needs when devising an activity. This is the most important, as I've just said. If you don't know your group or their needs before prepping, delivering or reviewing an activity, the activity isn't going to be very good. Should you be covering a session and you don't know the group or it's a new group that you're working with, try and find out as much information as possible before you start. So the things that you should consider about the people in your session, consider their age. We've touched on that before with the tennis example earlier, their ability levels and the number of participants. Now, because we've touched on the age and ability already, when considering the number of participants, it's really important to ensure that it's safe. Think about how many participants is safe using smaller spaces or kind of slightly bigger, but again, the ratio of participants to the space that we have. If age differs, their size may too, and in contact sports, this could become unsafe. Group people of similar abilities together. Again, I've mentioned this already when we were talking about the task. Grouping people of similar abilities together could help. It could avoid one player or one team getting a bit bored or frustrated if they're performing either less or more so than the other group or person. Generally, it works well, similar abilities, but that's not always the case, and not always the case for most sports. I'll go on to that. Rotate roles regularly so each participant experiences different tasks. So for that example, don't just let people just do one task, one activity for the duration of your session. Make sure you rotate it regularly so they can experience things. Make sure you rotate serving. Should they be serving somebody a ball in tennis and they can hit it back to you? Make sure you just rotate it so they can experience different things. Lastly, use participants to support other participants. When I said earlier about grouping people of similar abilities together, that it can often work, if it doesn't work and people become frustrated, for example, in a sport like badminton, should there be somebody of advanced level and somebody of lesser level be playing together, it's probably likely that the advanced person can help them and set up shots the other person can hit. If they're similar and both not very good, they'll both get really fed up and bored and not be able to hit many shots. So it's just kind of considering when you might want to pair people of similar abilities or not. The advanced participants could also start to kind of consider being your support coach, giving them more responsibility and helping you out, maybe working with a smaller group to help the others. Okay, so that's people. Again, can't explain how important it is to make sure that you're focusing on the needs of the individuals and your group. You might have a real varied group, but make sure you're looking at their individual needs to make sure the session is a success for everybody. Okay, speed, the final point. So speed, think about the pace of the session you are delivering and is it appropriate for all participants? So this is really about you and how quickly you're delivering an activity, how quickly the activities move from one to another, how long you spend on each activity, dependent on the participants, again, dependent on the people that you're working with. Okay, the points here, consider the length of time on each activity. Don't spend too much time if a task is easy. Participants will become very disinterested. Equally, don't rush through activities, particularly for people with a learning disability. Make sure they've got time to digest what they're doing and then perform the activity, practice the activity, and then start to enjoy it. Progress if participants find the activity too easy or is uninteresting and won't retain their engagement. Generally, you'll understand, you'll be able to see when people are becoming uninterested. So then you can make sure that you're reviewing the session whilst you're doing it and whether you need to progress or not. Really important to be considering that throughout the session, not just at the start when you're planning. Lastly, regress or slow down an activity to ensure it's being performed effectively. Again, if people don't understand it, work out ways that you can work your way backwards to regress, break down the action that you need to do, and spend a little bit longer on it. Slow down and ensure that each person can perform it properly before then moving on and progressing. That might differ in your session plan, but it's all about being reactive and looking at your participants during the activity. Okay, so that's the 5 elements. We've got steps, which is space, task, equipment, people, and speed. As I've mentioned, remember, if you want to adapt your coaching sessions to the needs of the participant, consider the steps model and those 5 elements before, during, and after the session. If you already have an existing session plan that you use and like, add these 5 points to the top to really remind you about how you can make your activities inclusive. Don't be afraid to change any plans whilst coaching. Not all adaptations, even if you're following this model, work. in theory as you may kind of think they would. So keep going, keep trying, and just remember to tweak to those in front of you. Okay, so that's the kind of the summary of the STEP model. So at the start, I mentioned the aims, and that was really just to improve your understanding of the STEP model, to give you more confidence when planning and delivering sports sessions. Hopefully that's done so. Hopefully you've kind of digested what I've said, you understand each of those 5 elements and how they all work together, and how you can use those 5 elements to then tweak your coaching sessions. That's the end of the recorded workshop. I'm now available for a live Q&A. Should I have gone too quickly for any of those points, you can shout those questions at me now. Thanks very much. Cheers.
Well, thanks, Lou. That was fantastic. It was so nice and concise and really well articulated, and really kind of highlighting the importance of using that really simple kind of approach, that model to adapting coaching. So thank you so much for that. As I say, we are now live for a Q&A. I think Emma's going to sort of take over and do the sort of comparing on this. But Emma, if you just maybe let me ask the first question, if I can just sort of.
Very welcome. Yeah, of course.
Louis, obviously at the moment for a lot of coaches, there's quite a lot of concern about they may not have coached for a few months, certainly done no face-to-face coaching for some time. To what extent do you think the STEPS model can really help a coach getting back into coaching, bearing in mind all the new kind of measures that there are in terms of trying to avoid spreading of coronavirus?
Yeah, great question, Hugh. Thanks for that. Hi, everyone. If you weren't here at the start, good to see you all. I hope I didn't bore you to sleep during that. So it's nice to actually some interaction, or to have some interaction now. Hugh, I'm surprised you didn't ask the question, the really important one that was at the bottom. I think somebody asking what we're having for dinner. I think that was the most important one. I'm certainly going to be having spaghetti bolognese soon. But no, to answer your question, yeah, absolutely. It's incredibly important to be considering all of the COVID-19 restrictions at the moment. And it's great to see how much guidance there is put out there by kind of supporting organisations to make sure that all coaches are being thorough. Obviously, the guidance only goes so far, and coaches need to do an awful lot first. So with that, STEPS obviously is a really good tool to plan and to thoroughly plan when you're kind of creating your sessions. There's elements of safety in there within the planning. Obviously, with the COVID-19 restrictions, it just really kind of heightens every aspect in STEPS because the risk is so much kind of bigger and greater. I started my club session, Wendy, I was gutted to not see you there, but my football team, Southwark Stars, we started again actually yesterday evening, and that was the first time our session started back. I did an awful amount of kind of planning, risk assessments, guidelines, players meetings and things, but of course as soon as you turn up, everything goes out the window and you have to kind of restart and do everything again. But when kind of thinking about STEPS particularly, COVID-19 does affect every single point. Space, it has a big impact on the amount of space that you use, particularly when you're considering kind of 1 metre plus or 2 metre guidelines. I know I use an incredibly small space, and we have kind of about 15 players in a very tight space. You have to be clever how you're using that space and how you're allocating space for certain people. That's not just when people are standing around, but also obviously when you're playing too. Task, obviously there's a bigger focus now on individual activities when you're performing these tasks because of the lack of contact that you're able to do. So just be considering how you might be able to tweak the activities that you would usually do for an individual styles kind of task. Equipment, obviously we've spoken about all the equipment that you could be using and that you need to consider. Obviously, before you even think about the type of equipment that you use, you need to be thinking about any of the cleaning before and after, how people interact with the equipment. A great example, last night, I went along and I was planning to turn up in good time, and ready to kind of take all my wipes, my antibacterial spray, and clean all the equipment that I hadn't used in such a long time, clean all that off, get it all ready. Lo and behold, I turn up, lots of the players already using lots of the equipment, using their own equipment, all kind of exchanging with each other, picking up balls, dropping it, kicking it, flying around everywhere. So although you need to make sure the equipment that you have is well looked after, also consider other people bringing equipment or how they interact with it. Just kind of lastly, I guess in the speaking about people, I know I really pushed that in that recording and kind of the need to understand people's needs. Obviously, we're living in quite a new world at the moment, and you'll find that a lot of people, particularly people with impairments, say a learning disability or autism, they'll have a heightened feeling or kind of understanding of the world we're living in, and maybe kind of feel slightly more anxious. Perhaps don't understand the guidelines and you need to repeat the guidelines much more. But yeah, look, just working through that. So Hugh, as you ask, kind of what implication does it have on steps? You can literally work through every point and consider how COVID just kind of really heightens the need to kind of plan really and use those points.
Brilliant, thank you so much. Great answer. Emma, do you want to get some more questions from the audience?
Yeah, does anyone want to kick us off? I do have one that's sent in to me earlier, so I can kick off that one maybe, and then give you a little bit more time to think. So have you found steps work equally well, irrespectively of what disabilities you have in your groups?
Yeah, it's a great question again. I think, yeah, it does kind of apply for all impairments. I listed off quite a few in the recording. Obviously, it applies to people that don't have impairments too. It generally is a really good kind of rule to use whichever coaching session you're delivering and making sure that you adapt for people's needs, regardless of what impairment they have. I think when I'm usually working with people about the STEPS model and working with coaches or volunteers, etc., it's very easy to bring yourself to equipment and the changes that you need to make to equipment, and particularly to some of the more obvious impairment types. So if somebody was blind or visually impaired, or I guess somebody that is a wheelchair user, it's really easy just to kind of think about the adaptations that you might make for those people, but you just really need to make sure you're thinking about everybody. And I guess that takes us back to the people and the people in front of you. Not all people with the same impairments will have the same needs. So kind of just get to know the individuals in front of you and work with them, and don't worry about the impairment type, worry about their individual needs. I guess in a short answer, Emma.
Brilliant, thanks Lou for that. Would anyone else like to ask a question, either in the chat? We've got a couple of questions in the chat, but I don't think they're entirely relevant. I'm
not sure when the clubs come back, I'm afraid.
Yeah, Elaine, call me after. Yeah, if anyone else wants to unmute themselves or even add a point. I know there's a few coaches here that have had good experience. I
think I can take any questions about the best football team if they're going. No, I think just to add onto those kind of onto the recording. Obviously, this is kind of a really entry-level tool to use. So for those that have been coaching a while, it can seem quite obvious, but I think it's just really important to kind of sometimes take a step back and to actually kind of consider all those points and not just do it without kind of passing by or just assuming that you are thinking about it. It's always really good to review and to kind of look back on what you've delivered and understand how you may have kind of you could improve some of those points. The space, the task, the equipment, the people and the speed, how kind of better could you have used those points and adapted it to meet the people in front of you's kind of needs. You're not always going to deliver a kind of perfect session, so it's a good framework to review as well, not just to kind of whilst you're planning and doing, certainly use it when you're reviewing. Chuck that one out there as well.
Yeah, I was actually going to add a point kind of similar to what you just said in terms of reflection is really, really key, I find, in coaching. Yeah, no coach is ever, or instructor is the finished product, and you do really, as you coach, the more different types of participants that you learn from and coach or teach, you then can take that back into kind of you as an individual and how you coach. And I also think you can plan all you like, as you've been saying, and use the steps model, but also I think you need to put your personality and kind of your what's the word? Your stamp, I suppose, on a session. You want to aspire and learn from others, but you are your coach as well.
Absolutely. You can come to my coaching style presentation next time ever.
Oh, I'd love to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Your point about reviewing is so important, and obviously you can review things yourself, but use your participants, use the people in front of you to kind of review what you've done too. Don't be afraid to be asking, to be seeing what they like, what they don't like, what worked well, what they'd like to do, or what they'd like to use. So if you're thinking about equipment, or how much space do they feel that they want. Don't always make the decision yourself. Remember to ask those in front of you.
Brilliant. We've got a couple minutes left, so if anyone does have the last minute inspiration of a question they want to ask, brilliant. Carly, do you want to meet yourself?
Yeah, I just wanted, do you have any tips on how to make someone feel included in a kind of, so I run circuits in a gym. How can you make someone feel included without making them feel excluded because you're adapting something? I really struggle with that, my own confidence. I can sometimes feel like I'm making people feel excluded by trying to include them by adapting things. So do you have any tips?
Yeah, really good point, and so important not to try and not to feel like anybody is excluded or different for any reason. I guess when I kind of spoke through the presentation about kind of some of the adaptations you make, I always try to feel, when I'm creating a session or creating an activity, I'll start with the person maybe that has the highest needs, and then kind of see what we can do, what that person will be able to complete, what they may need to need in terms of space, the task, the equipment, the people, and the speed, and then try to get everybody doing kind of a similar activity. So you start from them and everybody is doing the same thing. There's no one activity and then this person on the other side is just doing something slightly different. I always try to start, when I'm thinking of my sessions, try to start from that person. Should it just be one person? That's generally my kind of technique to do so. Not always really easy, because then you find that that might kind of essentially frustrate others, or might not be stimulating enough. But it's a really good starting point. I always think just the starting point is the best point to start, if that helps. So difficult question again, because you need to know how the person is as well. And that person might actually quite enjoy doing something different. And so it's kind of the flip side of everybody's individual needs. But certainly ask them, do they feel excluded, even if you need to kind of ask them at the side or what have you. Yeah, always good to ask them too.
Thank you.
That's a good question.
Thank you. Thanks, Lee. Well, I think one final thing that I've done before when I taught in a school was, if you say have like 7 stations, you can say everyone has to do 5 out of the 7. So they're choosing, and like probably naturally they won't do the ones that they might find more difficult. I don't know. I think Lou's answer was probably better, but that's something that I've tried before, and yeah, give them that choice.
No, that's great. Absolutely. Certainly give people choice within a session. I'm all for, I guess, organised chaos in a way, where people can make the decisions independently and you're not so rigid with what you're planning and what you're structuring. If people can understand what they can and can't do through trying, brilliant. That's even kind of better. But I wouldn't necessarily say always stick to that method, because some people might just not do something they don't feel confident doing, and then actually they could do it well. So certainly try and do that, make them feel comfortable within a session, but then certainly try to challenge and to test what people might think they can do. But yeah, in terms of kind of 5 out of 7, that sounds like a great way to ensure that they're really included within what you're doing.
Yeah. Okay, we've got a comment from Peter Ackred saying, important to look at the inclusion spectrum as well as steps. So I don't know if that's what you want to add to, or Pete wants to bring back to that.
I heard the other day, I was in a coach conference meeting, and there is a new version to the inclusion spectrum. Apparently it's kind of out of date slightly now. Not to throw Pete under the bus there, I don't know what it is at all. I heard it's either just kind of recently been produced. So yeah, absolutely, the inclusion spectrum is really good. If anybody doesn't know what it is, it's basically just, again, another model that allows you to consider the task that you're doing and the people and what they're and how they kind of complete a task. It's kind of much better for when you're considering competitive kind of practices rather than recreational, I find. But it divides up the task into whether it's people should be doing something separately, together but modified, and then also kind of whether there needs to be an adapted sport rather than playing a mainstream sport, changing it. Everybody plays the mainstream sport, the adapted sport, sorry. But yeah, great point, Pete. I'll let you know what that new model is.
Yeah. Brilliant, thank you. We have got to the end of the session, so if anyone does think of any questions they have for Louis at a later date, please email them free to the team. I'm sure he'd be happy to answer, as long as Arsenal have been winning and he's feeling a good mood. But yes, I'm going to pass back over to you just to finish off the session. But thanks, Louis.
Yeah,
very much.
Thanks, Emma. Again, just my sort of thanks as well, Lou. It's really good to catch up with you again. It's fantastic. You're still, kind of really on top of your coaching, doing a lot yourself, as well as sort of doing a lot of tutoring and training for us. So keep up the good work. So that concludes day 3 of the festival. So one more day to go. So bear with us. I hope we see you all again online. Another action-packed day. Lots of variety, lots of things for you all to do. So go away, have that food you've been talking about online, and enjoy the rest of the evening, and hopefully see you tomorrow. All the best. Cheers.
Thanks, all.
Bye.
See you, Elaine.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Bye, Louis.
Bye. Bye.
Bye, Emma. See you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow, Amelia.
Bye. Bye. Bye.
Thank you, Louis.
Bye.
Thanks, Louis. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Oh, I'm the main host. Sorry, I'm gonna have to end it. Just to record, save my photo there. See you tomorrow, everyone. First session is tennis at 10:30.
I'll be there.
You'll be there, Amelia, right?
Yeah.